Supreme Court showdown. The day Barrett walked off, the air in the Washington, D.C. studio felt electric with tension. 4 chairs arranged in a semicircle, microphones poised like sentinels, and untouched water bottles gleaming under studio lights. What was supposed to be just another episode of Civic Roundtable Live, a show typically watched only by policy wonks and insomniacs, was about to become a moment that would shake the foundations of American democracy. Justice Amy Coney Barrett sat with perfect posture in her slate blue suit, practiced smile firmly in place. Across from her, Representative Jasmine Crockett wore a dark wine-colored blouse, her expression unreadable except for a calm readiness that seemed to radiate from her very being. The other 2 guests, Professor Ronald Chu from UCLA and retired Circuit Judge Marsha Bell, completed the panel, unaware they were about to witness history. For 20 minutes, everything proceeded normally. Barrett spoke eloquently about public trust in the judiciary and the importance of constitutional principles. Crockett nodded politely, contributing sparingly. The conversation flowed with the predictable rhythm of countless panel discussions before it. But Jasmine Crockett had not come simply to participate. Hidden inside her blazer were 3 carefully folded pages, documents that would transform a routine discussion into a moment the nation would never forget. "Let's talk financial disclosures," the moderator, Clint Mason, suggested. There's been a lot of discussion lately around whether justices should follow the same standards as members of Congress. Jasmine, where do you stand on that? The room shifted imperceptibly as Crockett adjusted her microphone. "I think the American people deserve to know if rulings are being influenced by anything beyond the Constitution." Barrett's eyes flickered, just enough to notice. "I also think," Crockett continued evenly, "that when we talk about influence, we shouldn't just focus on campaign contributions or political affiliations. We need to talk about personal networks, behind closed-door communications, recusals that didn't happen when they should have." Mason leaned forward. "Are you referring to anyone in particular?" "Yes," Crockett replied without hesitation. "Justice Barrett." The studio went completely still. Barrett smiled thin but held. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Congresswoman." "I'm not implying anything." With deliberate calm, Crockett reached inside her blazer and withdrew 3 crisp pages marked with yellow highlights. She placed them flat on the table, not with theatrics, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what they contain. "I'd like to read from a correspondence dated March 18th, she said, her eyes scanning the panel before settling on Barrett. This was between a legal strategist named Ellen Greaves, who works for the Liberty Jurors Network, and a staffer connected to your chambers. The strategist references an upcoming decision on the Fair Districting Act. The language used implies prior knowledge of how you intended to vote." Barrett straightened almost imperceptibly. "I don't believe I've ever spoken to Ms. Greaves." "I didn't say you did," Crockett replied, "but the staffer did. The email makes reference to you by name and uses the phrase, 'We're confident the justice is aligned.'" Professor Chu leaned forward, curiosity flashing across his face. Judge Bell appeared stunned. The moderator blinked rapidly. "Congresswomen, have these emails been authenticated?" "They were submitted to my office last week by a whistleblower from within the Liberty Jurors Network. We verified them with 2 independent cybersecurity analysts. I have signed affidavits." Barrett's jaw tightened as she decided whether to speak. She chose silence. Crockett turned to the second page. "Here's a list of undisclosed donations to a nonprofit called Constitution's Keepers. In 2022, they received a $400,000 grant from a donor who also sits on the board of a conservative lobbying group. That same year, Constitution's Keepers hosted a private event in Alexandria. Justice Barrett was a keynote speaker. No financial disclosures have been filed indicating that engagement." Barrett interrupted. "That organization doesn't pay speakers. I attend because I believe in their mission, and we are not required to disclose unpaid speaking engagements." "That's fair," Crockett conceded, "if that were true. But the hotel was paid for. Flights, too. I have the receipts, including the reimbursement memo submitted to the donors fund." The silence in the studio transformed from tension to calculation. Everyone was listening differently now. Mason cleared his throat. "Let's remember this isn't a courtroom. We're here to engage in good faith." Crockett interjected calmly. But good faith begins with honesty, and we can't talk about judicial ethics in the abstract if one of the people in this room has benefited from the very gray areas we're here to address. Barrett finally turned her full attention to Crockett, her voice sharp when she spoke. Congresswoman, I've dedicated my life to the law. You're taking loose associations and trying to paint them as misconduct. That's not only irresponsible, it's dangerous. You know what's dangerous. Crockett leaned forward, making decisions that affect millions of Americans while hiding relationships that could sway those decisions. Barrett shifted in her chair, not dramatically, but enough to suggest discomfort creeping beneath her professional demeanor. Crockett continued, producing her third document. This is a call log from January 6, 2021. 2 calls between someone in your circle and a senior member of the Liberty Jurist Network. The same day that group filed a brief urging the court not to interfere with state election results. The timing is worth discussing. The moderator raised both hands. All right, we're going to pause here. Barrett didn't let him finish. I think we need to be careful not to accuse public officials without full context. These documents haven't been reviewed by any legitimate body. They should be, Crockett replied simply. She held up the second sheet again, this time ensuring the panel could see the donor list. Her finger tapped one name in particular. Jackson O. Weller, she said clearly, is not just a philanthropist. He's also a managing partner at Pinebridge Investments. That same firm had a case on your docket last year regarding regulatory rollbacks for environmental restrictions in southern Arizona. You voted in favor of easing restrictions against a 5-4 dissent. Barrett inhaled slowly, then exhaled through her nose, hands tightly clasped in her lap. Are you suggesting, she said carefully, that my legal decisions are bought? I'm not suggesting anything, Crockett responded. I'm saying there are patterns, and patterns deserve daylight. Professor Chu glanced over the documents. These are thorough, he mumbled. If even half of this is verifiable. It is, Crockett stated. And it's not just about a donation here or a call there. It's about the web, the proximity. We expect impartiality from the highest court in the land. What we're getting is shadow affiliations. Barrett leaned back. Congresswoman, I can't help who donates to a nonprofit. I don't control that. You're connecting dots that don't necessarily lead to wrongdoing. Crockett's expression remained unchanged. Then you won't mind answering why Pinebridge Senior Counsel was invited to a dinner you attended in San Diego 4 months before the court agreed to hear their case. A dinner closed to the public. No press. No record of attendance filed under your annual disclosure. For a split second, Barrett glanced toward the moderator as if seeking escape. Justice Barrett, do you want to respond? Mason asked. I was invited to a roundtable discussion by the Federalist Alliance, she said slowly. I attend those events to hear from professionals across industries. Did you know who would be there in advance? I don't see how that's relevant, Barrett snapped. It is if that event was hosted by a group that shares donors with parties appearing before you, Crockett replied. Transparency isn't just about what's legal. It's about what's ethical. Judge Bell, silent until now, spoke up. These are troubling questions, Amy. I know you. I work with you, but the country's watching, and people are losing faith. Barrett didn't respond. Instead, she reached for her water bottle. Her hand trembled slightly, enough that the bottle thudded against the table as she set it down. Crockett leaned forward again. This isn't personal, but it is serious, and if no one else is going to ask the uncomfortable questions, I will. Barrett stood suddenly, not dramatically, but with firm intention. She unclipped the small microphone from her lapel and placed it beside her notes. I came here in good faith, she said to Mason, not to be ambushed. You're not being ambushed, Crockett replied. You're being asked to be accountable, just like the rest of us. Barrett shook her head once, then turned and walked off the set. No goodbye, no parting words, just the sound of her heels striking the floor as she disappeared behind the curtain. The room fell silent. Chu looked stunned. Bell appeared conflicted. Mason glanced at the camera, then quickly away. And Crockett? She remained seated, calm, focused. Just when it seemed the tension might dissipate, Crockett spoke a single name that changed everything. Gregory Vance. Judge Bell's eyes lifted instantly. Even Professor Chu looked as though he'd heard something forbidden. Mason blinked. I'm sorry. Who? Gregory Vance is a name that hasn't come up publicly yet, Crockett explained. He's a retired attorney formerly employed by the Defense Liberty Coalition, now quietly serving as a legal advisor to several dark money-funded nonprofits, including Constitution's Keepers. He's also Barrett's brother-in-law. A gasp came from someone off camera. You're sure? Chu asked, sitting straighter. Confirmed by 3 separate sources, Crockett replied, glancing at her papers. Same man, same last name, married into the family 15 years ago. And here's where it matters. Vance sits on the advisory board of a nonprofit that filed an amicus brief in support of a ruling last year. That brief cited legal theory Barrett later referenced directly in her majority opinion. Oh my God, Bell whispered, running a hand over her face. That wasn't disclosed, Mason said, shaking his head. No, Crockett confirmed. It wasn't, and it should have been. At the very least, it raises serious ethical concerns, and at worst. She paused. It implies influence where impartiality is expected. Outside the studio, chaos erupted. Phones lit up in the control room. Twitter exploded with a #HashBarrett walkout. Clips of Barrett removing her microphone and Crockett's calm stare spread like wildfire. Reporters rushed to the studio, and the clip of Barrett walking out hit 1 million views in under 15 minutes. Inside the studio, Judge Bell broke the silence. I've defended members of this court my entire life, even when I disagreed with them. But there's a line, and we've crossed it. If a lower court judge did any of this, Chu added quietly, they'd be referred for disciplinary review. Crockett leaned back. We hold everyone to a standard until it becomes inconvenient. That's the pattern. That's a sickness. The moderator turned to the camera. For those just joining us, Justice Amy Coney Barrett has left the panel following allegations raised by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Allegations involving financial ties, non-disclosed relationships, and potential ethical violations. We're continuing this conversation with our remaining guests. Crockett looked directly into the camera, her voice steady but personal. I want to be very clear. I'm not doing this for points or press or political gain. I'm doing this because the public deserves to know who's shaping the law and how. They deserve to know whether that shaping is being done honestly or with invisible hands pulling strings from behind the curtain. By morning, headlines dominated every news outlet. Justice walks off as Crockett drops bombshells live on air. SCOTUS under scrutiny, Barrett confronted, leaves panel. The night everything changed for the Supreme Court. A 4-second clip of Crockett calmly saying, patents deserve daylight, was shared thousands of times across social media platforms. In Toledo, Ohio, a law student watched the footage on loop while preparing for his ethics exam. She just sat there and said it like no one ever does. No dodging, no jogging, just here's what's happening. That takes guts. In Santa Rosa, California, a retired public defender texted her daughter, I never thought I'd see the day someone called a Supreme Court justice out like that on live TV. Barrett remained silent as reporters swarmed her office. Her team issued only a brief statement. Justice Barrett will not be commenting at this time. She remained committed to the integrity of the court and the Constitution. But silence didn't help. Congressional leaders responded. 3 watchdog groups filed formal complaints with the Judicial Conduct and Disability Committee. News segments compared Congress's disclosure requirements with the court's near-total independence, and people began asking why the discrepancy existed. Crockett stayed mostly quiet, releasing only a single statement. What I brought forward speaks for itself. If anyone believes in accountability, they shouldn't be afraid of transparency. I'm here to serve the people. That includes telling the truth, especially when it's uncomfortable. She didn't gloat or seek the spotlight. Instead, she returned awake, reviewing additional documentation now flowing into her office from anonymous sources. Whistleblowers began speaking, carefully and quietly. What started as a spark had become smoke rising from unexpected places. Inside the Supreme Court, clerks were instructed not to speak to the press. Barrett's colleagues issued vague comments about protecting institutional integrity, but none defended her by name. The silence spoke volumes. In Tallahassee, a teacher played the footage for her civics class. Afterward, A student raised a hand and asked, if judges have so much power, who checks them? The teacher had no easy answer. In the months that followed, a bipartisan ethics reform bill gained traction, mandatory disclosures of federal justices, financial relationships flagged in real time, and a clear process for recusal. For the first time in decades, Congress had enough pressure to act. But the real change came in how people viewed silence from those with influence. Crockett didn't book a national speaking tour or run for higher office. She simply continued her work methodically and without showmanship. I'm not trying to take anyone down, she told a newspaper. I'm trying to make sure we don't look away when power crosses a line. If we let fear keep us quiet, then we're part of the problem. 2. Law professors updated their curricula. High school students wrote essays about her courage. Even some conservative legal figures quietly acknowledged that the public's demand for transparency wasn't about party lines anymore. It was about trust. Not everyone agreed with Crockett's approach. Some argued she should have handled it behind closed doors. Others called it political theater. But none could deny the truth of what had happened. She said what millions were thinking but didn't know how to say. The moment mattered because it wasn't about one justice or one ruling or one email. It was about how quickly faith in a system erodes when sunlight never touches its corners. A lesson emerged more powerful than the accusations, the walkade, or the headlines. If you're in a position of power and no one's asking you hard questions, you've already lost sight of why you're there. If you're serving the people, hiding from them is the clearest form of dishonor. And if someone like Jasmine Crockett can sit quietly, unfold 3 sheets of paper, and shake the walls of the highest court in the land, maybe the real power isn't behind the bench. Maybe it's in the courage to speak when it's easier not to. Because silence protects the powerful. But truth protects the rest of us. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell.